Hi, and welcome to The Lamp in the Library. I'm Graham.
I'm Kim.
And today we're going to be talking about the thrilling topic of endnotes and footnotes.
Yes, we're just going to discuss a bit about if we prefer a footnote to an endnote. Do we find they add a lot to the reading experience, or do they sometimes take away from it?
So I'm going to take a look at a couple of famous examples of endnotes and footnotes in fiction.
And I'm going to look a bit at nonfiction and classic poetry.
So Kim, which do you prefer, the endnote or the footnote?
I am definitely more of a footnote person because I find it's just easier to look down to that bottom of the page and then get right back up into the book instead of just flipping it back and forth all the time. It can feel a bit like playing tennis with your own book. And I think this leads easily into talking about nonfiction because you do expect to have a lot of footnotes or endnotes when you're reading nonfiction because...
Yeah, it's the academic standard, right?
Yeah, you have to cite where your information is coming from, where your sources are from, so you know that that's going to be in the book. And some nonfiction works will have a lot of added detail within their footnotes and their endnotes, while others are just more sort of listing the books and resources that they turned to gather their information. I know for myself, when I'm reading nonfiction, what I really appreciate is when there is a list of further reading at the back. So the top choices that the author chose that you might want to check out if you were really into the topic. I know that I've added some books to my reading list thanks to a really well curated further reading page.
Yeah, I agree. And myself, I think I prefer footnotes as well. It's just there at the bottom of the page and you can skim or not. When it's at the back of the page, you know, it is kind of tedious when you have those books where sometimes they have, you know, an anecdote or something really interesting in the endnotes, and then other times it's just, you know, citing a source. So you see that number hanging off the end of a sentence, and you go to the back of the book and it just says IBID.
Yeah,
it's annoying.
Yeah, kind of it's a letdown. It's a letdown in reading.
Okay, well, speaking of tedium, I'm going to start things off with an infamous example of endnotes in fiction. I am, of course, talking about David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest. This book is regarded as a modern classic. I do think that it is deserving of this status. However, it is a really good example of an author messing with you and messing with the reader's expectations. It's right there in the title, Infinite Jest, and it makes superfluous use of endnotes, which are, at times, incredibly tedious. Lots and lots of endnotes in this book.
Well, Graham, why don't you share why you decided to actually finish reading the book?
Oh, yeah. So somewhere on the internet, maybe it was Twitter, someone was making fun of those who had Infinite Jest sitting on their bookshelf unread. Because I think this is a book that a lot of people purchased, but because of its length, it is a door-stopping book. Didn't finish it, and I looked over at my bookshelf, and I realized that I was indeed that person. I had started Infinite Jest. I went back to school, didn't have time to finish it, and it was just sitting there for months and months unread. So
it shamed you.
It shamed me. It shamed me into persevering and going through the book, and I'm glad I did. However, there was some tedium involved with these endnotes. And what's really interesting, like I said, the author is deliberately messing with the reader and the reader's expectations. And there is a lot of tedium in the endnotes on purpose, but there are also important plot details hidden in the endnotes, so you do have to read them if you're going to understand this book. So...
It's interesting to note that David Foster Wallace, even when he was teaching some courses, his syllabi would have a lot of footnotes or endnotes, so he must have just been very attracted to using them.
He definitely loves them, and he employs them in very witty ways. So it is interesting. I don't know if I'm selling people on this book, but if this sounds like something that you're attracted to, a book with lots of humorous endnotes and an author that is deliberately messing with the reader's expectations, do check out that incredibly long book, Infinite Jest.
So what's the other example you have in fiction.
So here's a book that employs footnotes to, I think, spectacular effect. This is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. And this book takes place in a universe where magic is real, and it takes place during the Napoleonic Wars. So it employs the conventions of a novel from the late 18th, early 19th century, and some of those conventions include the use of footnotes. And I think the footnotes are really spectacularly used in this book, and they really flesh out the world and really add to the world building and are fascinating. So in contrast maybe to the tedium of Infinite Jest, the footnotes here really add to the reading experience.
Yeah, it sounds, I've had it on my TBR list for some time, but I just never end up picking it up, I guess because it looks longer. But I like the idea of playing with the footnotes in a book that has to do with magic and the occult, because it's sort of like uncovering secret knowledge, which really seems to go with that theme.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is all about the secret knowledge and like the hidden history of this character called the Raven King. And it's really some fascinating footnotes that you really want to get into them and you know, kind of expand your knowledge of that world.
Yeah.
Really well done.
Definitely want to pick that up this year. So next we're going to end with just talking a bit about poetry and classic poetry. And I thought I might highlight how sometimes when you get too fastidious about reading every endnote, it might take you out of the flow of the work you're reading. And so I know for myself personally, when I finally picked up the Divine Comedy, Dante's Divine Comedy, I got this edition because I saw like how well annotated it was, and I just thought, okay, this is going to really help me understand the text better and, you know, the context in which it was written and all the different characters he's referring to. And especially at the beginning, there was a lot of like flipping back and forth, but I found myself getting taken out of the flow of the translated poetry, but still the flow of the narrative by constantly going back to some of the endnotes, and it sort of made me rethink of how to approach it. So while I read it, I think I might go back and just read the whole thing just as the poem itself, so that I can just be fully engrossed into the world that Dante's created and see how it speaks to me through its themes, because in a lot of ways it's the themes that are really important to this work. But at the same time, it's really great to have something that grounds it more for you, so it's sort of, you know, do you ever find sometimes it takes you out of the flow of the narrative?
Yeah, it does. It definitely does, and that's I guess the major downside of, you know, endnotes or footnotes, and you know, especially in a work of poetry, it's going to take you out of the rhythm and the flow, and that's an important part of the artistry of the work. And you know, I in the context of, I don't know, Shakespeare or Dante, you do kind of need some historical grounding. But it does definitely diminish the reading experience in some way.
Yeah, so sometimes it's maybe good to just read the work for itself first, and then go back and sort of reread it by visiting the endnotes and footnotes. At least that's what I found for myself.
Well, I hope that was an enlightening little look into the fun and exciting world of footnotes and endnotes. And on that note, we will end.
So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe below, and hit the bell so you always know when there's a new episode. And please comment down below if you prefer endnotes or footnotes. Do you find that they add a lot to your reading experience, or do they sometimes detract from it?
Thanks so much for watching. Keep well.
Keep reading.